necessarily make sense.
Yes, he did.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Greetings. Charlie is not with us today. I think he's out in Virginia way, taking his son back to college. So God bless all of them on that trip, and may all be safe. Hey, if you're looking at the 11 o'clock rebroadcast of this program, I've been 60 years old for approximately 7 minutes. But if you're watching tonight at 7 o'clock on Thursday, I got a couple days to get there, and hopefully I will make it. So welcome to Donnybrook. Joe Holleman is with us. We'll get to him in a second. But other than that, the usual cast. And we'll start with Wendy Wiese from KTRS. Hi, Wendy. Bill McClellan. Oh, thank you. Bill McClellan, columnist, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and generally an all-around good guy.
Thank you.
Ray Hartmann, one of the founders, like Bill, of this program.
Happy birthday, Mr. Provocateur.
And also a good guy. You have to not say that. And, of course, Joe Holleman sitting in, probably he would be in my chair, but he's sitting in for Charlie because we're all in our own chairs. And, Joe, you said, what is this? This is Zoom number 3 in your distinguished career.
And extinguished. It depends on how this show goes, I guess. Yeah, I've only had to do one Zoom meeting before the test for this. And in this here, I gauge my success in my professional life on the fewest amount of meetings I have to attend. So it's been a good COVID time for me. It's been great, fabulous, enjoyed every second.
Oh, there we go. Well, we're going to start off kind of solemn. We lost a police officer to violence over the weekend. Officer Bohannon, prayers to you, your family, and all police officers across the country. It's a very dangerous job, and it took his life over the weekend, and another officer was injured. We've had 8 police officers reportedly shot in the city of St. Louis since the beginning of the year. So we just got to get it under control. But right now, all we can do is grieve. So thank you, police officers, and God bless you, Officer Bohannon. Bill, we're going to start with you. The mayor, Lyda Krewson, left her home. Obviously, protesters are gathering outside of her house somewhat frequently. And she said, I ran for mayor. My neighbors did not run for mayor, but being the mayor, or being me, I would not leave my house under any circumstance. I would try to take control of the situation, but I would not be chased out of my own house. How do you feel about that, Bill?
Oh, I don't blame the mayor for leaving her house. This situation is like the Cultural Revolution in China a few years ago. She's lucky they're not making her wear a dunce cap and march down the street. I think the protest against Lyda Krewson, the people. I wish that the people would just wait for the next election. That's why we have elections. And I don't blame her at all for saying, I'm going to spare my neighbors the nightly trouble.
I agree. I think it's completely untenable for her at this point. It's been a very difficult summer with the doxing scandal and all of the people and the video footage that we saw of Lyda, Mayor Krewson, trying to meet in her front yard. And, that is a disruption. We have no idea about her neighbors and whether you have, any young children, whether you have any elderly people who, need a certain level of care and they're not able to maybe rest. I mean, I don't blame her at all. I think that these, as much as we all long for precedented times, these are unprecedented times. And if she feels that this is the best course of action for her family, then I think we all have to support that.
But
I know what you're saying.
I'm fine with the protest, the peaceful protest. I have never been a fan of going to someone's residence. I think that you can protest at City Hall and other places just as effectively. My own view is that the one person, the one family that ought to be, and I don't blame her. I mean, I really don't. Again, I'm sympathetic to the protests and don't think anyone should, if they want to continue, fine. I don't like them being at the house. I think if anyone in that neighborhood should be moving out, it would be Mark and Patricia McCluskey. And I'm sure their neighbors would love to pitch in to help them with their moving expenses.
Am I on this island alone?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. I'm sorry, Alvin. I can't join in there with you. I would have went out there. You know, I was at her house several years ago when the peaceful protests turned into them breaking windows at her house. And we all know that can happen. And the idea that you're supposed to stay there to do what? There's really, I don't know what it is. The protesters want her designed. Hate to be a spoiler here. I don't think that's going to happen. So why don't you go home, leave those neighbors alone? You're not doing anything for your cause. You're not adding any information to the argument. You are being a nuisance. You are planning on being a nuisance. And I think as part of her job, I don't think subjecting yourself, your family, and your neighbors to what amounts to a nuisance is a good idea. So good for her. Stay somewhere else. Or maybe those folks could just go home, or as Ray suggested, protest at City Hall where there's a higher visibility, where people could actually see you protesting. Otherwise, I think it's completely useless. And I hope she finds a better night's sleep.
Symbolically, I would stay. I'm the standard bearer for the city of St. Louis. I'm the mayor. I think I would stay. I just, and maybe if I was in that situation, I might have a different opinion. In fact, I'll be honest enough to say I probably would. And Ray, you stole my closing line. I was going to say what you should do is buy the house next to the McCluskeys, and that way they can visit there pretty much nightly. All right. The steel line from Wilson Pickett, our Senate in the state of Missouri, was late in the midnight hour and decided to come up with a bill that would help prosecuting attorney Kim Gardner with murder cases in the city of St. Louis, I guess, that weren't tried or weren't, funneled along within 90 days. They also passed a law before this in regular time, the daylight, that takes away the residency requirement for police officers in the city of St. Louis. Ray, I'm going to start with you on that one, okay?
Yeah, it was an outrageous thing. It was really awful. And Senator Carla May referred to it on my show last night as plantation politics. I'll let that speak for itself. I think that, well, first of all, we don't know what the House is going to do. I understand that the Missouri Association of Prosecutors again today has voiced its opposition. That is a very important force to be dealt with politically around the state. No prosecutor wants to see this kind of usurpation of any prosecutor, especially one who just won by 21.5 points and got the largest number of votes that anybody got in a prosecutor's race in the primary since George Peach in the 1980s.
Yeah, I'm with Ray on that. In spite of what I believe has been a poor job as prosecuting attorney, she was elected, and I think I won't go as far as I think I saw a quote that said, "This is all political showmanship," and that's what politicians do. City, county, local, state, whatever. And that's what this is. And the idea that the state's going to run in and be our saving prosecutors, it would be one thing if a city or a small entity said to the state, "We need help." I think that's a whole different ballgame. But this is someone just sticking their nose in it for political purposes. And even though I may agree with their assessment of her job performance, when you get 60% of the vote, you stay in Jeff City and handle your stuff and let the city folks handle their stuff.
Amen to all that. And the other point is she was not a stealth candidate. It isn't like no one really knew what she was up to. The city has had an entire first term of reform, and we had a woman who promised to be a traditional prosecutor running against her, and the city voters decided we'll have more of Kim Gardner. So I don't know why the state should even think about getting involved.
Wendy, got a quick question for you. Go ahead.
It is political showmanship, as you've all said, because I mean, this is just red meat for the red base. They're not going to move the needle in terms of in terms of votes in the city of St. Louis. So yeah, this is pure showmanship in the 11th hour.
Alan, can I add one thing to this real quick that gets left out of this discussion? Not only did Kim Gardner win by 21 points, 21 and a half points, she beat a very qualified and respected former prosecutor in Mary Pat Carl. So it wasn't like, sometimes you say, well, it's just the way the election went. She beat somebody who would have been a good prosecutor. So it wasn't like the voters didn't have an intelligent choice to make.
All right, real quick to throw it out here. Senator Jamila Nasheed accused Bob Onder, who brought up this proposal that is now, I guess, been passed by the Senate, of carrying the water for Eric Greitens, not Governor Parsons, Eric Greitens. Is there an underlying current of conservative Republicans that are trying to help him find his way to the gubernatorial nomination in 4 years?
I think so, because there's 6. You got to remember something. There's 23 members in the Missouri Senate who are Republicans. 23. Only 6 of them are in the conservative caucus, and 2 of them, Bill Eigel and Bob Onder in St. Charles County, and a third one who people, if they're mad, should take it out on, Andrew Koenig, who's, I believe, your district, Alvin. They are members of a conservative caucus that is much more, they look down on the other 17 Republicans as not conservative enough. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's one of the undercurrents, because I'm pretty sure that Mike Parson isn't conservative enough for them either.
All right.
But we've got to stop trying. We've got to stop trying. We try to overturn every single election that takes place today. We expend so much energy and money trying to do that. I would love to see that, along with the cancel culture, go its merry way.
All right.
Yeah, I got to pitch in here, because I see a theme going on here, and it kind of goes back through the Kim Gardner. I think so few things now are being done with the goal being to get results. You talked about red meat for the red base. I don't know if blue meat for the blue base sounds very appetizing, but I think that's all what a lot of these things are. There's nobody looking to solve a problem. What they're looking to do is get their message to their people, keep their people motivated on whatever it is that will motivate them. But actually solving a problem, I think that's way down the list on both sides' priorities.
Okay. Now, also, the Senate, and it's headed to the governor's desk. They have ruled that you do no longer have to live in the city of St. Louis to be a city police officer. Joe, your thoughts on that?
As a city resident, I think people who work for the city should live in the city. And I've always understood there were certain exceptions, certain jobs that had to be filled that might be difficult to get. Historically, the director of airports, back when the city was in the healthcare business, usually the top doctor at the city hospital lived outside of the city. But by and large, most everybody either lived in the city or gave some relative's address who lived in the city and did it illegally. But no, I think if I want to quote the late great Alderman Joanne Wayne, who said she didn't care for people who came to the city to make their bread, then went to the county to make their bed. And I think a residency requirement, I think if you have a young man or a woman who is deciding to be a city police officer, given what they know about the city of St. Louis or any major city, they're doing that because they want to work in a big city police department. If they wanted to work for a small community one, let them apply in the suburb they live. I think if you want to be a city police officer, I do not think it is an onerous obligation to say that for a certain period of years, you need to live here to get to know the streets, to get to know the people that live here, to get to know the pulse of the city. I think those are crucial things for a police officer to know. And I especially have a problem, and kind of going back to the Kim Gardner thing, when a legislator from Hannibal or Springfield is going to remove a residency requirement. You know, it's been on city ballots before, and city voters have said, no, we don't want to get rid of it. So it's coming up again. Let city voters decide city issues. Real simple.
You know, I agree with Joe on that last point, and we've talked about it before, how unbelievable it is. This is 2 months from today that the city voters were going to decide this for themselves. I disagree with Joe on the basic assumption, on the premise. I've been against the residency since I lived in the city, but I do think that the city ought to incentivize officers who do live there. In other words, I think there ought to be a bonus. There ought to be some benefit to people as an incentive for living in the city, as opposed to a requirement that officers. And keep in mind, the circuit attorney's office, the treasurer, the sheriff, none of those offices that are so-called county offices have that same residency requirement. It's only the city offices. So I don't think there should be a requirement, but I think they ought to figure out an incentive to reward police officers for living in the city.
I hate agreeing with you, Ray, but I think that incentivizing, that's it. That's great.
Well, I thought Joe was eloquent. The only problem I have is when you have the police chief and the director of public safety, Jimmy Edwards, both saying we're short on police, and the only way we can do this is to get rid of the residency requirement. I got to feel like, well, those guys pretty much know what they're talking about, I would think.
I think that remains
at least temporarily, because these are such extraordinary times. We can revisit imposition of it later, but right now, and I know, Joe, as a non-city resident, that has to to fall kind of flat on your ears. But something has got to happen with the crime in the city and the violence.
Well, I agree with you too, but I also don't think the police officers create the violence. I mean, if we want to talk about how to stop the violence, hiring police officers won't stop violence. It'll just mean people who commit violence will be more readily arrested. I think everything gets dumped on the police officers' responsibility to make these great social changes when they are, by definition, a reactionary force. I do see Bill's point when you have the top two folks in the public safety game saying we need to remove this to do it. But I guess the point is let them make that case to city voters, not state legislators.
I agree with that, Joe, no question.
And not everybody agrees with them. I know Lewis Reed has some questions about whether they've actually had, there's vacancies and, people that want to get hired from the academy that they haven't done a great job of filling those positions. But I think Joe was eloquent, but I'm still trying to unpack the whole blue meat thing. I'm trying to
that was unique. Absolutely.
Don't you mean like kale maybe or something?
I don't know. It's just the red meat for the red base, and it's just I don't know. We'll work on it.
All right. Well, our neighbors to the south, Jefferson County, they passed a mask required ordinance and less than 24 hours later rescinded it. Now, they said it was because of the way that the legislation was pushed forward. And I tend to agree with that. If they left themselves open to a lawsuit, then you have to change. But Wendy, you think that's what it was about, or you think they just backed down?
I think they probably just backed down. Anybody who saw the video footage, heard the audio footage, that's a lot of heat being generated by a lot of really angry people. And it's easy for me to criticize people who are in positions of leadership because I'm not a leader and I'm not taking that kind of ferocity. I mean, that kind of blowback is difficult for anybody, even in the best of circumstances, not just a pandemic. But what's kind of sad about it is that so many of those anti-maskers fall into a certain political silo. And within the last 12, 15 hours or so, the White House task force on the pandemic, they called Jefferson County out as a red zone, meaning that the spread of the virus is completely out of control there.
Well, I don't know how the White House can call anybody out on it. I mean, if the president's going to give his convention speech to a crowd of well-to-do people sitting out there without masks, if you're in Jefferson County and you think this is all a hoax and you watch those people, I mean, and then they call you out. I think it's, and I agree with Wendy that the reason they rescinded the vote was A, there was too much heat, and B, nobody was going to listen to them anyway. I mean, it's going to be a bigger problem.
I want to add something. I'm the only member of this panel who was a 10-year resident of Jefferson County, I believe. And I love Jefferson. I had a great time. I'm living there. But I have to say, it is, just as St. Charles is, really connected to the rest of the St. Louis region. It's as much a part of St. Louis as the city is. And I'm not down with I understand the politics of it. This makes the case not only for a state mandate on masks, but a national one. We shouldn't be having this conversation. And I, with Wendy, puts a lot of pressure on the leadership in a place like Jefferson County, but we're all affected by this. And it's a big deal. And masks are not too much to ask of people. It's not some great civil liberties issue to require you to wear a mask in public. If we had done this with a national mask mandate when we should have, we might be in an entirely different place than we are now.
We probably would be, but go ahead, Wendy.
I'm sorry, Alvin. In his Washington University press conference this afternoon, Thursday afternoon, the governor it was quite startling to see him emphasizing the importance of wearing masks and social distancing. And I thought, finally.
No, not finally. Then do a mask mandate. Don't talk about it.
Well, that's our governor. All right, our governor to the east, Governor Pritzker, he's putting the lockdown back on Metro East. Says the COVID is a little bit out of control, probably facing the same problems in those municipalities that we are over here, with a lot of people just not doing it. So, right or wrong on that, Joe, should we go back to where we were in early spring here? Is that one way takes people off the street, takes away a lot of the risk of COVID transmission?
Well, as nice as it was in the first 2 months riding my bicycle when no one was out and all the streets were empty, I think the idea of doing a second shutdown, at least from people I've talked to, and admittedly from friends who own businesses, who said it's the second shutdown that they fear, because he said nobody's taking into account. They think we shut down and then everything froze. And then 3 months later or 2 months later, we opened it back up. No, they had gotten rid of all their inventory. My friend is a restaurant owner, then had to resupply to open back up. And his point was a second one. He said that a certain number of people will not survive an initial close down. But some of those businesses might have been struggling anyway. But he said if they spend the money then to reopen and revamp their process and then get shut down again, then it's going to hurt some good size that were once decent, solid businesses. And I think the idea of that everything needs to be sacrificed, I mean, and I guess a lot of this, and I haven't been on here for these months, so where the debate goes, but has the curve been flattened? Are we not flattening the curve? What is a good gathering? When is it okay to get together? Thousands of people, some of them without masks. I think that's why nobody's believing any politicians with what they have to say, is because they seem to, as we said before, meet for their base. They say what they think their base wants to say. I think this second shutdown is going to take a whole lot of people in Illinois, send them over to Missouri to go to a restaurant, to go do their work. And I think a lot of businesses that could have weathered Illinois' first shutdown are really going to be hurt by the second shutdown. And I think that's something that is a sad, or at least should be taken and looked at as a negative, as is the coronavirus.
Is there any other alternative for them? Just let things go?
To shut it down again, and for how long? That's a question. Until what?
Okay.
It just illustrates, Joe's so right, and it illustrates why it's so difficult to do this on a county by county, state by state basis, because we just don't have, and I don't want to, I guess I'm coming back to the same teleprompter, but it's like national policy. You can't do this piecemeal, and it's very unfair. These small businesses, they look and say, well, what about Target and Walmart?
Well, they're Target and Walmart. Okay, another real quick, down the road in Columbia, where my daughter goes to school, a sophomore majoring in engineering. All right, they had about 100 or so COVID cases when the kids returned to school. Now, at least as of yesterday, they were up over near 800. Too much too soon, and they're talking about actually, penalizing students that are caught breaking the rules. Is this a good idea? Is this a flight of fancy? What do you do, Wendy? You went to college. I mean, would you be following the rules?
Well, I've had conversations with many friends, and you could not possibly have kept me locked in a dorm when I'm, re-entering the atmosphere of Mizzou. I went to Fontbonne, and that was off the chain too, as I've said before. But no, you're young and you feel invincible, and that's part of being young and invincible. And I think they've turned a lot of these violations over to the Student Accountability Office. And so hopefully they will come up with some kind of policy and not have to expel anybody. These kids are kids, and they're going to continue to be kids. We have to keep, in the same way that we have hammered home very effectively the message about drinking and driving. We have to mount the same kind of campaign when it comes to wearing masks and social distancing as much as possible.
Well, when it's like Animal House, where the correct punishment here would be double secret probation. And nobody knows it, because you just cannot, like you say, you cannot expect kids off to college to not violate social distancing, and that you can't drink with a mask on. So you can't smoke a joint with a mask on. Why else are you in college? So I would say, they can act stern as long as they don't try to punish anybody.
Wendy, I am far older than you. And when we went to college, the essence of our motto was question authority.
All right, we got to run. All right. Hey, stay tuned, because Chris Krehmeyer from Beyond Housing is going to be on next. Thank you for watching tonight's Donnybrook. See you in a couple minutes.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network. Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Hi, well, welcome back to the second part of Donnybrook this evening. We are pleasured to be joined by Chris Krehmeyer, President and CEO of Beyond Housing. It's like many people in this world right now, I'm sure he's staying busy. How you doing tonight, Chris?
I'm great, Alvin. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm going to start out kind of with a what if. Deadline for people having to pay their rent was going to be October 2nd. That has been passed back. Obviously that's a pretty good thing, I'm sure. But what if that deadline had actually gotten here? What starts happening on October the 3rd? Don't want to start with the gloom and doom, since it's not right here right now. But I do have an interest in what was going to happen.
Well, look, a whole bunch of families were going to be in dire straits. A whole bunch of families were going to be in jeopardy of losing their homes, of being kicked out. For the first time in a long time, the federal government actually did something that worked, right? Between the payroll protection program, the $1,200 stimulus check, the bump up in unemployment, it actually worked, right? It staved off a disaster, right? When COVID first started and then we shut down everything, we all thought, oh my God, this is going to bring just a wave of devastation to so many families. So again, what they did actually worked, but now by refusing to again look at the problems that still exist and invest more in families, terrible things could have happened. Now, look, at the end of the day, people still owe the rent and they still owe the utilities, right? So we've kicked the can down the road a little bit, and that's better than causing devastation. But at the end of the day, I think it's hard for folks to understand the stress and strain of this pressure hanging over your head that I might get evicted, I might get kicked out, and where am I going to go? Particularly if you don't have any income now because of your job loss due to COVID-19, and what that brings to families and what that brings to broader communities.
Wendy?
Well, Chris, do you think, or do you perceive a willingness maybe down the road? You're talking about kicking the can down the road. Once we're out of the chaotic place that we find ourselves, do you see this really changing things? The landlords still have their mortgages. There is that ripple effect. But I still think that all of these conversations certainly can lead to more substantive, those changes that you talked about in the future. Do you pick up on that at all?
So look, you have to be hopeful, Wendy, right? At the end of the day, it's really, again, as we said, many folks have said, it's a health crisis that's led to an economic crisis, right? And if we don't understand the implications and the domino effect, right, that will happen if, again, there's not more investments into families and into communities. So again, as you said, landlords big and small, what are they going to do if they can't pay their mortgages? And if you don't pay the banks, then what happens? So again, there's this big cascading impact unless, again, we have the political will and courage to say, yes, we need to stave off tremendous damage from an economic standpoint, and quite frankly, from a family and community standpoint. If you can imagine the neighborhoods that are already struggling, if they have more devastation, more economic loss. Look, the violence we're seeing in a number of places all across the country, including here in St. Louis, a piece of that puzzle, of course, is the economic stress and strain that's going on. So if we add evictions and foreclosures and utility shutoffs to all of that, it's only going to get worse. So I'm hoping that we'll have some leaders who will say we need to invest in the things that we know can stave off this significant problem, both here in St. Louis and all across the country.
Chris, I've been rereading Isherwood's book, Berlin Diaries, that they made the movie Cabaret out of. And he was a struggling English teacher living in a boarding house. And it made me think, why don't we have boarding houses anymore? We have a lot of big old homes and, where people could rent a room for a week and they're just renting one room and it's cheap. A boarding house, how come we don't have any boarding houses anymore?
Well, look, Bill, I think we moved on to this idea of how we live in this country, right? With the ideal being the single family house with the white picket fence. And the idea of congregate living like that with strangers was something that we moved away from. Now, to the extent that where we're at today, where we still have homelessness, which is unthinkable in a country with such great wealth, and we have so many people struggling to find a place to live, I think we should think about innovative ideas, whether it's a boarding house or any other kinds of ideas about how are we going to take care of families, right? How are we going to make sure that kids aren't uprooted again and that we have families doubling and tripling up and what that does to folks. So again, whether it's a boarding house or other again, new ways of thinking about how do we take care of families and our children, I'm up for, again, having that conversation about how do we do that.
Chris, I haven't read any books lately, but I was wondering, tell us the scope of what your organization is. How many families, however you want to phrase, discuss the scope of the problem we have with regard to housing. I see a lot of plaques on your wall back there. You've obviously been doing a lot of work, but tell us how many people you serve and how wide a range geographically.
So we own 500 units of rental housing. A lot of that is in the boundaries of the Normandy School District here in kind of near North County. But we also own homes all throughout St. Louis County, further north and further south. So we have a rental population that we serve. We also have 13 staff people embedded in all the Normandy schools. Again, there's over 3,000 kids who go to the Normandy schools. So we have staff that interface with them on a regular and ongoing basis. We have community health workers on staff that see another couple hundred people. We run after-school programs, summer programs, sports programs. We own a grocery store, a movie theater, a couple of restaurant spaces. So again, all in all, throughout the course of the year, we'll see anywhere from 10 to 15,000 people, needing our services in some form or fashion. And what folks tell us, because we've done a couple surveys since COVID started, and we're in the middle of another one right now, asking people, what are you thinking about and what are you worrying about? And the most distressing thing is this most recent survey. We've got about 150 surveys in now. We're trying to get to about 300. Everything's getting worse. The number of people who said, I don't think I can pay rent in September, and the next month being September, has gone up. The people said, I'm worried about, can I pay my utilities, has gone up. The number of people who have actually lost their jobs has gone up. The number of people who have got their hours cut if they're still working has gone up. So all the trend lines are negative, all the trend lines are bad. Clearly related to the July 31st date when they didn't, again, renew any of the, support for families who had lost wages and lost income because of COVID-19. So again, we see a wide range of folks. And again, in places that are low income, there's a higher percentage of folks like that. The folks who live in a lot of the communities we serve worked in retail, worked in places that, again, were hit the hardest by the economic shutdown, or they were in jobs where they were put in harm's way because they were having to deal with people who had COVID-19. So either you lost your job or your job was putting yourself or your family in harm's way. So again, I think what we've seen, there's been this great dichotomy that if your life is okay and you still got your job and you can work from home and do the Zoom thing, that by and large, there's some inconveniences, right? Oh, I can't go to my favorite bar anymore. Or how do I manage the 3 Zoom meetings that my kids have? That's a much different scenario than I don't know what's going to happen because I don't have any income and I don't know where I can get a job because my skill sets, there are no jobs available to me. What's going to happen to me and my family? Again, there's this great dichotomy between, quite frankly, the haves and the have-nots that's been exacerbated by COVID-19.
I had a question about when you talked about the kicking the can down. I guess the point is that when the federal government decided not to renew the additional benefits, but how long should they have been renewed? And at some point in time, or do you just do it indefinitely until everybody says they're okay? Or I mean, when you say kick the can down the road, I think usually what sometimes people think is it means well, there's a problem I'll never have to deal with. They don't look far down the road to where the can went. I mean, what would you like to see the federal government have done instead of denying it for 3 months, for 6 months more?
So much of this is dependent upon how we get past, the spread of COVID-19, right? It's a health issue that caused the economic issue, right? So we keep hearing a vaccine is happening sometime soon. Yay. And we're getting better testing, faster testing. The saliva testing will again make places a little more safer. So again, it's tied to how quickly we think we can reopen the economy where people can at least have some semblance of a chance to again regain some, if not all, of their income from before, so they can pay their rent and pay their utilities and buy their groceries, right? So it could have been a very strategic and pragmatic way to say, okay, maybe it's not $3 trillion again, and maybe the bump up of $600 unemployment is not needed, necessary anymore. But maybe we carry it out through the end of the first quarter of 2021, when hopefully there'll be a vaccine that is in wide circulation, that folks can feel comfortable about. I can reopen my business, and from a public health standpoint, we're not endangering people's lives and having more than what's the new number now? 186,000 people have died. Again, how do we take care of the health problem? And once that's there, then we can certainly say, look, we can't keep writing checks out of the federal coffers forever, but this is a global pandemic. This is a once in a lifetime situation. We can write some more checks. And I think, again, from our vantage point, if we don't, suffering's gonna continue. And guess what? We're gonna pay for that anyway. At the end of the day, we're still gonna pay for people suffering. And why don't we invest in having them not suffer, allow them not to lose some of the gains they made in their life, and position them when this is, when we're on the other side of this, whatever that may look like, they have a chance to keep their life moving forward as opposed to having the life come crashing down. And guess what? We got to pick up the pieces anyway.
Chris, you may own your house, you may live in a nice apartment, but wherever you live, when they turn off the utilities, you live in a cave. And you mentioned that, and I don't want to seem like, utility companies are more impatient than landlords are, but my guess is they probably are. So, I mean, you can get your check, you can pay your mortgage. It seems to me that the problem would be keeping your lights on. So how do you work with the utilities to just give people a break, which would now, you mentioned July 31st, by the time we get through this month, that'll be 3 months. So how is that working out?
So the utility companies, I think, are doing what they can. I think they need to be pressed to do more, to have a greater degree of patience. Look, like landlords, they got to get paid too, right? They have their public utility. There are some statutory things that they have to do, right? They are a quasi business and they have to get paid. But what degree of flexibility can they have relative to extended payment plans? So how quickly do they have to move to disconnect, right? There are a number of things that, again, they're being implored to do, being asked to do. And again, the statewide commission that oversees Ameren, Inspire, and all them are really pushing them to say, what are you going to do? Because we are in a crisis. And we don't want to be the cause of a lot of hopelessness, quite frankly, because if in a lot of places, if your utilities are shut off from a rental perspective, that's cause for eviction, right? So now there is a moratorium, but eventually that's going to catch up with you. So again, I think the utility companies understand their role from who they are in our region, and are doing what they can, but they're going to have to be pressed and to do more. And I think my sense is, I was on a call yesterday with folks from Ameren. They understand that they need to do more, and they're trying to figure out what does that look like. Because what they don't want to do is somehow give the wrong notion that, oh, you don't have to pay us and it's going to be okay. No, you have to pay your utility bills. The question is, again, how do we support families in this interim period when so many people are struggling financially, that we don't inadvertently cause great harm because they can't pay their utility bills? Now, look, philanthropy has a role. And I think, again, there has been a whole lot of philanthropy in this space. But the scope and scale of the problem is so large that the federal government is going to have to play a role in addition to philanthropy at the local and national level.
Chris, you're talking about the most basic needs, the food and the shelter. We see people in affluent areas who don't have to worry about food and shelter buckling under this pandemic in terms of the stress, just the everyday pressures that no one could possibly have predicted. What are you able to do? Or that's got to really be painful, trying to figure out how to help these folks who are struggling emotionally and mentally. What resources are available to them?
Yeah, so again, there are some mental health resources, but quite frankly, not a lot, Wendy. There are enough. So what we try to do, again, the basis of kind of our work is, how do you build trusting relationships with families? And that is just, again, being there with them over time, not just showing up one day, saying, hey, I'm here to help, right? So again, being there on a consistent basis. So what our staff does on a regular basis is, again, we're phoning, we're texting, we're staying in contact with our families. We've been able to raise dollars from a charitable standpoint to make sure every one of the families that lives in our rental homes who has had a economic downturn, we're making them whole, right? We're making sure nobody, because of COVID-19, is going to fall behind in rent, and we're able to raise those charitable dollars to do that. In addition, we're supporting them in terms of paying their utilities as well. And part of our rationale is, clearly we don't want them to suffer through no fault of their own. But to your point, we want to eliminate the trauma and the stress and strain of, oh my God, what am I going to do? Right? Where am I going to go? How am I going to take care of my family? So we want to take that off their plate and say, just take a deep breath. We're going to be here and support you through this process. And then hopefully things will turn around and you can go back into the workforce. You can get a job and start getting your paycheck. Right? Again, I think sometimes I think people forget, it is no fun being poor. It really isn't. It's a struggle, and it's hard, and it's stressful. And people have figured out, okay, how do I do this? And how do I manage my way through this? How do I work in these systems that aren't designed for me to be wildly successful? And our job is to support them as best we can, understand what their needs are, and try to meet those needs in real time. So they're not struggling with, here's a list of 15 phone numbers. Good luck. I have no idea if any of the numbers are any good, but this is all I got. We try to be better than that and try to say, we're going to find you the resources to solve the problem that's in front of you today.
Chris, I had a question about when you talked about donors. Are you seeing a difference? I know there's always the very rich folks who will help out and are philanthropic and will donate. But what about those small business owners, the people who used to maybe be good for $250, $300, a $500 donation to Beyond Housing? Now they're in a business. Nobody's threatening to turn off their electricity, but now they're concerned about their money. And how has it been raising money during this time?
Well, Joe, I think you make a great point. But again, corporations and foundations and the affluent have been wonderful to us and to many others here in the region. But there is a big gap, right? Again, if your business was reliant on, again, the whole economy working well, then you're struggling. So yeah, we are seeing some folks that have said, love you guys, but we're not in a position now to lend a hand. So we understand that, and again, are trying to make do with the resources that we do have. What we have seen is there was that initial wave in March and April. A lot of philanthropists say, okay, how can we help? Now we've made this interesting shift to the issue of racial equity because of everything else that's happening on top of a global pandemic and the economic downturn. So now we see a lot of funders really saying, what are folks doing relative to the racial equity space? And again, how do we as an organization and so many of my peers out in this world today, again, how do we, again, tell our story in a way that gets at issues that are front and center that we've been dealing with for many, many years, but haven't necessarily said, oh, we do racial equity. Well, we work in communities of color and have so for 40 years and trying to give people opportunities to live their best lives possible. So philanthropy is important. It's changing, it's evolving, but we are losing some subsectors because of the downturn in the economy.
Chris, I know yours is a political organization and a 501c3. So without getting into any kind of partisan issue, what can we be doing as a city and a county and a region and arguably as a state in Missouri? What would you like to see happen going forward on the other side of this pandemic that could help in what you do?
Well, Ray, I think it's invest in the things that we know have been problematic for decades. Invest in more affordable housing, right? Invest in making communities stronger. Invest in helping families tackle the things in front of them day in and day out. We have this tiny incremental dollars that we allocate to these big problems that have never gotten any better, right? If St. Louis is ever going to be the prosperous region we all want it to be, it's going to have to tackle neighborhoods and communities that are struggling and invest in them in a real and meaningful way. And until we do that, again, we're going to be tinkering at the edges and not making headway. So I always ask people to pick your community level outcome that's important to you, and tell me, has it gotten better in the last 30 years? Just pick anyone. Public education, home ownership. I mean, just pick anyone that you think is important. We've not, and this is not St. Louis, it's the whole country. We've not made headway on literally anything. So again, to keep doing the same thing is the old definition of insanity. So as opposed to saying, oh, we're going to eke out nickels and dimes for problems that are really large, we're going to have to invest in a serious way. And that's a hard conversation for politicians to say, we're going to spend more money. But at the end of the day, do we want St. Louis to be what it is today, or do we want it to be better and stronger and more equitable? And if that's what we want as a region, then we have to invest in it, right? We have to invest in those things that we know that we don't need another research paper that says, hey, invest in children when they're young. That's a good thing, right? We know that's science and fact, but have we done it as a region? The answer is no. We know when people live in good, safe, affordable housing, kids do better in school and neighborhoods are stronger. Do we invest in that in a real meaningful way? No, we don't. So again, I'm hopeful that at some point there's some courage that says, let's do things differently. Let's look at the problems that are keeping us as a region back and invest in those things that we know will work.
Chris, if we could go back to the current crisis for a minute. There's been a story in the paper the last few days about a very large contract that the state entered with a retired general and his company to coordinate the relief efforts. Have you noticed, has the state been pretty smooth running on this? Have you had a good relationship with the state?
We haven't seen the state much here, Bill. So.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Can't have no.
The general hasn't been at your office or anything.
I have not had to salute him in any form or fashion. So no.
Okay. All right.
I ain't too busy counting money. All right. Hey, well, all right. That money, but a lot more. Chris, when you say affordable housing, okay, and I pride myself on understanding what I don't understand, and I know the concept of affordable housing, but what is it, and how many people would live in a complex, and what is that complex like? Is it simple? Is it, I think people, if they could see what it looks like, maybe they would be more willing to support it. But I mean, I'm everywhere from Pruitt-Igoe to like an old folks home. I don't know what it looks like.
Well,
explain that to me.
Yeah, Alvin, it can range from, so our portfolio at Beyond Housing is 400 single family homes and 2 senior buildings, right? So it can be a single family home, right? It just, again, the idea, look, the idea of affordable simply means that people of modest means today can be able to afford it, right? It's not a radical concept, right? So when we get into, okay, how come there is not enough? One, there's not enough resources to it. And if we want to go back to all the systemic racism stuff about where people of color were told they can only live and what's happened to those neighborhoods, and then what happens to those school systems, and if the kids can't get a good education, can they again get a good job and a good income, and it self-perpetuates. So again, this idea of Pruitt-Igoe as what affordable housing is, no, right? Can it be a larger complex? Of course it can. But it can also be smaller complex. It can be single family housing. It can be duplexes, right? What the phrase we like as opposed to affordable housing is really this idea of home, right? When you ask somebody, tell me about the first place you remember that was your first home, right? And what was important about it wasn't the physical structure, right? Was it a single family house or a multifamily? It was what was happening both in the house and then when you went outside in the community and neighborhood, what was happening there, right? So again, how do we create this sense of home where people feel safe where they live, where they can come home and sit around the kitchen table and talk about, the day, and then put your head on a pillow and feel safe, and then get up and do it all over again? So can we replicate that sense of home no matter what the structure looks like, right? Can we say you should feel safe in your neighborhood? You should have access to decent schools. You should have access to grocery stores and other retail things that are important to you and that what you need on a regular basis. How do we do that in a way that says to everybody in the region that you deserve those kinds of things, and we're going to help make them happen for you? Again, if we don't do that, again, we're just kidding ourselves, right? I mean, look, if you look at what's happened to North City, and you start coming west across Skinker, Keelan, and Jennings Station Road, it's starting to look a little bit like that, right? And unless we're honest about that and say we need to invest in communities and in the families that live there, again, whether it's single family housing or multifamily housing, we're not going to see our communities get any better. Our region is going to struggle. The tax base is going to wane. And we're going to be throwing up our hands saying, oh, wow, what do we do? Well, again, we know what to do if we just have the courage to invest in the things that we know work.
Then, Chris, you know that the 9 Network and the viewers are incredibly proactive and equally as generous. How do you acquire those single family homes? Are there ways that people perhaps who are listening who can help you out in ways they never thought to help you out?
Well, sure. So it's a mix of both buying and rehabbing them, depending upon who the owner is. And we also have received tax credits over the years to build new. So it's a combination of both. So again, if there's folks out there, who have grandma's old house, mom's old house, and they don't know what to do with it, and it's a place where I don't even know how to again operate something like that, we'd be happy to talk to them and see if that's something we'd be interested in looking at. Again, I think it's also just advocating from a policy standpoint of, look, we'll do another round of tax credits for the state of Missouri. The St. Louis region will get maybe 3 projects approved, and maybe we'll add 100 units of affordable housing to the St. Louis region. My organization will get 100 calls in first 3 days of every week. Right. So this idea of, oh, well, we have that tax credit program is just ludicrous, right? It's not a question of is the glass half empty or half full. We need a bigger damn glass. right? So we need more resources, again, to invest in the things that we know will help families, will help children, will help neighborhoods succeed. So again, if the listeners are interested, clearly we love charitable contributions. So again, they can help us with that. But again, if they have some real estate in their family that they don't know what to do with, again, we'd be happy to talk to them about that. But again, just push for policy that says let's invest in a serious way if we're going to make change in the St. Louis region.
Thank you, Chris. Before we let you go, though, hey, give us the website address. I'm sure there's some way I could find out a way to donate to you probably at that site. So what's your website address?
It's just www.beyondhousing.org, and you'll see all the great opportunities there. You'll see a whole bunch of other resources, other programs that we do, the work we do in this community. So again, appreciate the time and the conversation.
Thank you so much. Hey, on behalf of everybody in Donnybrook, thank you so much. You have a great night.
Happy birthday, Alvin.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Alvin.
Happy birthday, Alvin.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.